I am delighted to be here with all of you today. And the context of this is building bridges to funders. And I couldn't have broadened that to supporters because I know that this is a big initiative that you all are starting to take on. So uh, it's it's an unsettling fact to me these days, and to many people, and maybe the root of some of our cultural dysfunction, that we all have this tendency to live in a bubble. Our interests and our perspectives are sometimes seen by us as, the right way and the only way, and this is truth. And it's like we see the world through, a movie camera lens that has a pretty narrow focus on it. It has a pretty narrow lens. It's a narrow screen view, and we miss everything that's happening behind the scenes on the rest of the movie set. And there's actually a lot happening to put together what's seen in that narrow view. And then we wonder, why is it that people don't connect when we're only seeing through that view? And like everything in conservation, our success in connecting with supporters and funders is going to mean moving from that somewhat narrow lens to a much wider angle, and even in some respects a panoramic lens. So yes, you're diving deep into securing more funding, and that's going to mean building these successful relationships with new funders. And what I'm going to do today, and I'm going to try to do this in a short amount of time, is dive into some important high-level principles and practices to help build bridges to funders and successful funding relationships or supporters. So my aim is to do this succinctly enough so that we have some time for some back and forth discussion and Q&A. So next slide, thanks. Here's how funders come to the conversation. They come with, just like the rest of us, they come with their own perspective. And so we're going to have to get what they want, which is their perspective, to align with what we want, you want, which is your perspective. And you're going to have to address a number of big ideas from that funder. So imagine a funder and imagine a little bubblehead of idea. They're thinking, and you can see their thought process. Okay. And so, in order to get what they want, which is your perspective, to align with what you want, meaning, I'm sorry, what they want, align with your perspective, here are the thought bubbles that are above their head. Okay. The funder's going, hey, do I care? Do I care? And is this within my set of interests, and why? And this is all about mindset and framing the challenge, and it's where I'm going to spend most of my time today with you. And so it's really essential to get this nailed and to come at this with the right mindsets. The funder is also going, hey, well, do you offer me traction? What is it that the money's actually going to achieve? And then the funder's thinking, well, why you? Why you my best bet? Why should I fund you and not somebody else? Okay, and so to answer these, we're going to have to shift our perspectives. Your perspective is going to have to shift from me, my, and I to them, us, and we. Okay, so now go to that next slide. I'm going to talk about 4 big ideas today. And chances are, if you compare the answers to those questions that you saw on the previous slide, the funder's perspective, if you compare the answers to those questions, the funder's answers with your answers, there's going to be some difference. And the job is going to be to dissolve those hard edges of difference and get those perspectives and interests to align. And to do that, you're going to have to change out your movie camera lens from really narrow to something much wider angle. And I come to this with a lot of years of experience. I led a collaborative landscape partnership of over 80 partners. They crossed 2 states. I was the director of that partnership in Lake Tahoe. And every time I spoke with a partner, every time I spoke with them, whether it was funder or program partner, I had to think and solve and act from the perspective of knowing and holding my own organization's thoughts and views while predominantly tailoring my solutions to their perspective. Okay, so let's go on these 4 big ideas. Next slide. This first one is what I alluded to when we started. The bad news, it's really not about you. It's just not about you. We all want to be loved and belong and think that we're the center of our world, and we're not. We live in this bigger world. So when you're building a bridge, right, you want to get to the other side. And in order to get to the other side, you can't stay on your side of the bridge. You somehow have to get over there. And so the key mindset here that we get caught up in is, what about me? And we get kind of lost in, what do I want? How do I look? How do I sound? How do I feel? How am I coming across? And we forget, no, I'm not here for me. The primary objective here is to serve, and to serve them well. Because if I can serve them well, I'm probably going to get it back. Okay, so this mindset makes a huge difference in whether or not we connect, and how you connect to their perspective is to orient away from what I call WIFM. And WIFM is what's in it for me. Orienting instead to this service mindset when you go to connect is, we can help one another, and I can help you get what you want and need. That's how you orient away from I, me, and my toward us, them, and we. So it takes a little bit of humility, because you got to make the other person successful, but it's way more powerful than with them. And I'm going to give you one of my favorite examples from my old board meeting days on this. And there was a presentation that was being given, and the staff presenter was smoking along. He was doing a good job. And a board member asked this really hard question. Well, why can't we do what this funder wants? Why can't we do what this applicant wants? And he squirmed a little in his chair, and he said, well, because it would be hard, and I don't have a lot of time. And you kind of put your head down, and I said, oh, he was toast at that point, okay? Because he made it about him. When he was about to get beaten up by the board. And so we kind of rushed in, and somebody said, Mr. Beloved Board Member, I think what we meant to say was, this funder's approach, this funder's perspective is inconsistent with our core principles or with our governing principles or something. something that made it about something bigger than, our own unique small interests. So you see that difference, right? You see that difference in that response. So, okay, it's not about you, but how do you craft your ideas around them? And we go to the next slide. Second big idea that you have to keep in your toolbox is, hey, you got to know them. You have this big idea. You have to stand in their shoes. You have to speak to their identity. This is the know thy funder, know thy supporter, know your adversary. Who you're trying to connect with. Well, you have to do your homework to find out. You have to set this up so you do your due diligence. So what are their values? And how do you know? Well, you start asking questions. What makes this funder tick? What are this funder's values? What are their programs? What are their priorities? What are their idiosyncrasies? Who do they run with? Who are their grantees? What's on their websites? How do I mine into their existence and design my conversations with them to speak to those values and priorities that you and the funder share? So I'm in the middle of this in a project that I'm closely involved in. I'm working with a collaborative in the Midwest. It's got hundreds of collaboratives working within its member community all across the country. It has national reach, and we're currently debating how to frame our outreach around a major funding initiative. And when I say major, this is not small. We've set ourselves, a big goal of $150 million. So this has meaning, and there is no one size fits all. And we are currently debating many different kinds of messages, and we're having to adapt and modify to all these varied audiences. And it's all about trying to orient to standing in their shoes. So as briefly as I can, I'm going to give you this example. We've been debating a lot of things, but I've made it, kind of two extremes. Do we frame broadly around connecting our disconnections? We're connecting disconnections from the land, from people, from one another, from the community. So that pitch sounds something like this. Hey, many of the challenges we face today share a common root, a growing disconnection from the land and from one another. What is needed is not simply more funding, but a better system, one that strengthens the capacity of people and communities to connect with one another and to care for the places they call home. That's one pitch. Or do we frame more narrowly around improving the efficiency of landscape conservation funding? And that pitch could sound something like this. There are literally thousands of collaboratives across the country, and the current system for funding conservation and stewardship is fragmented, inefficient, and administratively burdensome. Our collaboratives spend 30 to 50% of their time navigating funding systems and writing grants and doing reports. What we need is a funding source built explicitly for stewardship and the urgent but patient timelines that stewardship requires. Okay, each one of those could be absolutely right in its own context. So we're having to be really adaptable depending upon who we're speaking with and what the funder's identity and values are. And ultimately, we're heeding that big idea, number one, of it's not about us. You make the funder the hero of the story. You make the funder successful. What's going to resonate with them? Here's what could be accomplished with your monies through this grant, through this program. But all of it is crafted strategically, and one way is on a narrow frame, narrow camera lens view. We have a great project. You should support us because it's squarely within your portfolio. You funded 6 others like that. That's one approach. The other is, hey, what if we're not in their portfolio, squarely in their portfolio? We're trying to convince them. So another frame is this broader lens. Hey, this grant, these monies open up a whole new geography for you, never before. And we have this time-tested, successful approach, and it could expand your scope and influence. Okay, one of those speaks to tradition, and the other speaks to the funder's aspiration for reputation. So you stand in their shoes and you speak to what you think is going to resonate with them the best. And all of this, the currency of all of this is trust. And we understand this in our work, right? So don't go in and dump your message right up front. Spend a whole lot of time up front investigating and listening. And nurture that relationship with curiosity and questions. And start building trust by showing that you care about their funder and building a strong relationship there. Okay. So when you do start talking about you, let's go to the next slide. When you do start talking, where do you start? So you realize I'm not going in talking about me right up front. Then you realize, oh, I have to speak to their concerns and values and identity. Now you're like, oh, now they're asking me to start talking. Where do I start? Make why the foundation of your framing and pitch. Almost everyone starts a pitch or a relationship with what? Let me tell you everything I know and everything that I want. Here's what I want. Here's what we do. You just lost them because they have no context yet. Or you start with how. Here's how we do what we do. Let me tell you all the ways we do what we do. You lost them again. Resist starting with what or how. Resist starting there, and instead, you're going to start your messaging from that very highest level. Know your why, and build your messaging around your why. Have any of you ever seen or heard Simon Sinek's YouTube video on the golden circle? Okay. If not, watch it. All you have to do is Google Simon Sinek, Sinek, and golden circle, and it will come up. Once you watch it 100 more times. Okay? If you can align your why to any portion of the funder's why, you're 90% there. And here's how Simon Sinek talks about it in that video. So here's your first watch. You only have 100 to go after this, okay? So after telling, and the first thing he says in his talk is people always start with what and how. Don't start there. And he says this, he explains it this way. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The goal is not to do business with everyone who needs what you have. The goal is to do business with everyone who believes what you believe. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And if you talk about what you believe, you will attract people who believe what you believe. And what you do simply proves what you believe. It's in that why, see what he understands and what he's trying to convey. It's in the why. This is who I am. This is what I stand for. That's where your connection is going to occur. And their identity connects to your identity by talking about your why. This is the emotional pathway into the relationship. And then you move into what and how, but reveal and connect first, if you can, on your big why. So at TRPA, which is where I worked, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, we had to make our why a major culture change initiative for ourselves. Everyone across the board in the agency was starting with what and how. And we were building more enemies than supporters. We had to change by starting with one central core value that was our North Star. It defined us, and it was our must-have in everything that we did. And it went something like this: in every stump speech, in every communication, in every interaction, it went something like this: everything we do is about partnership and collaboration to maintain and improve the well-being of Tahoe. If we can't build it through collaborative buy-in, we don't do it. The challenge we're solving is how to connect more of Tahoe's interests through collaborative partnerships for the long-term restoration and enhancement of the environment, the community, and the economy here. We'd like to work with you and make you successful through partnership with us. Really simple stump speech. And I think I used 1,050 variations on it, and so did everyone else. But that was the big why. And if we could get people to connect on that, now we got something to work with. Okay. So reveal and connect on your why. Only then think about going to the what and the how. So what is next? Now you've got it down, right? You're past your why. What's next? Go to the next slide. The next big idea is, okay, now you start to lead with the challenge, and you communicate this clear, compelling value proposition for what you bring. Okay, this is your 15-second elevator speech. You now found yourself in the elevator with the in the elevator with the funder. It's like, here's my opportunity. What am I gonna say? Okay. And this is your problem framing and what you bring to the relationship, and you got to make it short and clear enough that they can repeat it later. They can actually remember it. So the funder needs to be able to understand why your work matters in under 60 seconds, okay? This is also where you synthesize those first three big ideas into your messaging. So it looks something like this. Here's the big challenge. Here's our North Star goal. Here's the change we want to see. Here's why it matters. Here's what we do to achieve that goal. We do A, B, and C. And here's why it works. Here's how we get this desired outcome. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. But this is about placing your ask in the context of some larger meaning. And sometimes it takes a while to think about that. And that's okay. Some people talk about this as your theory of change. So here's the example, and it's made up, but it's very realistic because, we did years of this. in Tahoe, and I'm sure you do too, in your own context. And so, North Star, what's your North Star? Our goal is to complete forest health and fire suppression treatments on 100% of the forested acres in Colorado within 10 years. All the better if it's in a state plan, say that. That's our big North Star, big goal. Why does it matter? Not because it's what my organization does. No, because we do this in the face of increasing wildfire threats to protect private property, to for the benefit of our, make up numbers, $10 billion recreation economy in the state, for the forest products industry in the state, and for the resilience of the forest ecosystem for the next generation. Oh, you captured a lot of interest there. Oh, maybe you're going to connect with your funder on one of those. Maybe not all of them, but maybe on some. Okay, here's what we do. Here's what we do, and here's what we need to do it. Hey, we've completed, make it up, 50%, and now we're in year 7, and we're seeking grant funds for the next 10%, 20%. And oh, by the way, we have match from the state. Here's what we need to do to get to that big goal. Next question, why does it work? Being able to complete this is the next segment. It treats, again, I'm making up, it treats the most high-risk acreage ahead of the next wildfire. Or it puts us on schedule and on target with the state plan. Or it targets preventing catastrophic property damage in areas that are within the wildland urban interface from the next wildfire. In other words, speak to your funders' interests and values here, right? So you're not really entirely coming from your own interests. You're trying to speak to them. You're trying to speak to some bigger purpose here. Painting that overall context is way more powerful than, hey, we'd like $1 million for this next many acres of forest treatment because it's part of our mission, right? No context, no sense of scale, no sense of importance, no overall meaning. That's what's going to grab something in the funder's value system. So you make that ask stand out in some way in importance, not just hang loose as an independent one-off. It's unconnected to anything bigger or more meaningful, okay? Okay, you've done a fabulous job on everything that just came before this, right? You've done it all. It's not about me. I'm standing in their shoes. I told them my why. I gave them my compelling value proposition. And they go, yeah, yeah. But why you? I've got a lot of other people who have need. Why you? Why you over others? What are your differentiators? Okay, now you got me thinking, what makes me stand out among others who might be like me or among.
I think we've lost Joanne.
Yeah, sorry everyone.
It looks like Joanne has joined us again. Welcome back, Joanne.
Okay, I don't think I've lost internet in 6 months. So of course,
It's always when
today.
it's going to happen.
Where are you? You want to keep going? Are
Yeah,
we good?
I think we're all eager to hear the rest of your presentation.
Okay. Okay. So I think where I was I was on kind of the obstacle of, well, what happens when they say, yeah, but why you? Right? And so what makes you stand out? What makes your need more important than all the other unimportant, other needs, either like yours or not, unlike yours? And the example I want to give you here is I do some executive coaching, you know, on the side. And I was working with one of my clients. This is not a conservation example, but I think it's going to show you a principle of how to work with this. This client of mine wanted her CEO to invest in raising the compensation of women in the corporate C-suite where she was working, among the corporate executives, because the women on the team in the C-suite were substantially underpaid compared to the men. And so gender equity was her highest value, her highest principle, and she was getting pushback from her CEO, who interestingly happened to be a woman. She was all ready to go in with tables and data and a ton of analysis, just ton of analysis, to make the case, hey, we're setting ourselves up for gender equity litigation, okay? And I'm thinking to myself, people in the C-suite do not sue their employers, for that. That's no one will ever hire after that. Okay. So I asked her, fortunately she came to me, she said, what do you think of this presentation? And I asked her, what do you know about your CEO? And her short answer was, well, she loves analysis. So I'm going to go in with analysis. And I said, okay, what else do you know about your CEO? And we talked about it at some length. And she says, oh, she values tenure and experience really, really, really highly. And the women on this team don't have as much tenure and as much experience. So she framed up her whole pitch around misaligned values. She took her highest value and thought, I'm going to go in and try to convince my boss to make that her highest value. But the CEO was using tenure and experience as a proxy for reputation and status. Okay, that was her highest value. You don't have to agree with it. You just have to recognize it, become aware of it. And she'd framed up this pitch with like this misaligned set of values. And so what we did was we reworked the whole conversation around, we framed it in terms of reputation and status, but not of the individuals, but in comparison in their market sector. They were in like the lowest quartile of their market sector in terms of comp for these positions. The end result of aligning with her CEO's value system was she got raises for all the women in the C-suite. So it's a small, I mean, it's a different kind of example, but somehow you got to set yourself, you got to define your differentiators correctly. And sometimes it takes a while to discover that. But okay, so all of my points here so far have been on this similar theme. How are you going to frame up your challenge? How are you going to frame up the need? How are you going to, define your underlying problem and purpose? You can frame it small and limited. Sometimes that's all you need. But likely, if you're going for any substantial amounts of money, you're going to probably have to scale up your context, frame it from a bigger, more meaningful perspective. But either way, You got to be speaking to your audience's identity, their values, their needs, and become really conscious and intentional about how you speak to meaning in a way that grabs them and their own aspirations. So I want to make just a couple last points, and they're not as long. And it's this big idea. This is not news to you guys. I know this. Facts don't persuade. Rarely do facts persuade. Emotions do. We have two brains, right? We have a slow brain and a fast brain. If you ever get a chance and you're inclined, not everybody likes this kind of reading, I do, but Daniel Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize winner, he wrote a book, Thinking Fast and Slow. We have two brains. Our slow brain is our intellectual, rational brain. Our fast brain is our emotional brain. That's where we make all of our decisions. Watch yourself sometime. That's where you make your decisions. So you've got to hook your potential supporters' emotions. Everything I've been talking about is some of how you do that. And yes, you use story to your advantage. This is what I'm saying. This is no news to you. You're a storyteller circle, right? So what I really want, and you can tell your story with compelling videos, and you can tell your story with fancy takeaways, documents, flashy, glossy, takeaway documents. You can tell your story on social media. The only point I really want to make here, and it's not on this slide. I totally changed my talking points around this slide, so don't read the slide. Okay. The point I wanted to make here was we used to use site tours to a huge advantage, right? I don't know how possible it is in your context, but if you ever get the chance to actually walk a potential supporter out on the land and walk them to your project sites and walk them to different, to the context, like get them out in it. It tells a better story than anything else. Here's where your money's going to go. Let me show you what we did, or let me show you what this other group did. Here's what it's going to do. We did it all the time. You break bread together, you walk in the woods together, and it makes a huge difference in terms of relationship building, storytelling, and seeing the real thing. So I'll leave that at that. Go to the next slide. And this is the last couple of pointers, and these are simpler. Make the complex simple for them, right? So my first point: avoid TMI. TMI is too much information. Decide what's essential. Like really get intentional. What's essential, and don't data dump, especially not early on. And at TRP, we used to, again, the agency I ran, we dry run our presentations all the time. We dry run our talking points because there was always a tendency toward TMI, too much information at first. And so we'd hone and hone and hone and hone until we got to the essentials about what about our message do we most want to emphasize? Okay, related to TMI, avoid inside baseball, like avoid acronyms, avoid techie terms if you can. If you want to be understood by new and different audiences, they're not going to know your inside baseball terminology. So, a whole slew of acronyms, they're going to be lost. So you may not be talking to insiders. You may be talking to people who are brand new, who you're inviting in to your milieu. Okay, so find substitute words. care for stewardship, nature for ecosystem, river and stream for riparian, um, uh, uh, the ability to adjust or adapt instead of ecosystem adaptation and resilience. You get the point, write it for a fourth grader. If it's appropriate. Okay, so let's go to the last slide. I've offered mostly big ideas here, big principles, how to work with bringing in new supporters. And we like straightforward and simple, and our messaging isn't always straightforward. Can't always be straightforward and simple in the sense of it's not necessarily one size fits all. So you really have to think about your audience, and it can be complex and messy in making all of those adjustments. But the bottom line is always, always, always show your funder or supporter the context, the bigger context at the level you think is going to resonate with them the best. And sometimes you have to reach. Sometimes you have to reach to that higher level. So don't just go in with your bare ask. You have to adapt to that audience and make the message depend on how big your goal is. But these are principles that I've found over the years really, really helpful. I hope they're helpful to you. And you know, you can go on to that last slide. You can reach out to me, or if you just want to talk something through, you can always give a call. Okay.